Many say they have seen ghost figures from past times roaming in and out of the hospital, or have heard injured people screaming on their beds or trying to walk in its corridors. Many bold men who have been inside declare they felt like someone was watching them and that they saw strange shadows moving. Some people believe it, some people don't, but any story that is told about the English hospital has certainly been based on some real events. The building of the English hospital is located in a high point inside the old fortress of Corfu. It was stone built in 1835 during the British rule of the island and began its operation as a military hospital for the care of the English army in Corfu. From the beginning of its operations, and for a long enough time, it operated under calm conditions, treating mainly sick and not seriously injured. During World War I, it was used especially heavily as the English and their allies, who were on nearby military fronts, carried some of their wounded there. In 1940, after an agreement, the English handed over the administration of the hospital to the Greek army that was located in Corfu, which continued the same use of the building as a military hospital. When Corfu surrendered to the Italians in 1941, they used it again as a military hospital and as headquarters of the occupying forces, but it was not confined there. The hospital's backyard was used as an execution site, and Italian records of the time state that some rooms of the hospital were used as torture chambers for suspects and members of resistance organizations. The hospital was burned to the ground on the 14th of September 1943 after a German bombing, taking with it nearly all those inside. When the German army occupied the island, it was renovated and used just like the Italians had. After the end of World War II, the building was taken by the Greek army and refurbished yet again, giving it the form we see today, and using it, as far as we know, only as a military hospital. Gradually, parts of the hospital were shut down, and in the end there were only some bureaucratic services of the army. The final abandonment took place in the early 1980s, and in 1985 the Ministry of Culture gave the site of the hospital to the Ionian University to rebuild and settle their Department of History there. For unknown reasons, however, the reconstruction was stopped shortly afterwards. In the summer of 1982, the local newspaper of Corfu published that through the hospital there were voices and screams heard. She reports that some who listened to them said they were crying, "Please get me out of here. I don't want to die." In this incident, the police were alerted, and although throughout the investigations there were still voices heard, nothing was detected. One afternoon in the spring of 97 or 98, one student visited the outdoors of the hospital. As she was in the front yard looking at the building, she saw something that made her cry and run away in panic. She later said she had seen in one of the windows of the second floor the figure of a soldier with a miserable, pale face and gauze around his body, standing directly in front of the window as if sitting on guard with normal military uniform, looking into infinity towards the sea. As he stood and watched him keep his watch on the window. He turned and looked at her with a cold look, as if he hated her, as if the girl had done something that bothered him a lot. Some friends who told the story did not believe her, telling her that it was more likely to be someone who happened to visit the hospital at the time she was there. But the girl insisted that what she saw was not a normal person. Some days later, she went back with a friend and saw nothing. But just before they left, a horrible screaming of pain sounded like they were torturing someone. They immediately fled and alerted police, who had been searching for 2 days at the hospital, but again, nothing was found. Many say they have heard voices and tears at times in the hospital, but there are some who say they have seen in the backyard of the hospital, where executions were once carried out, the reenactments taking place in front of their eyes. They claim they have seen the faint silhouettes of people coming out of the building, standing in a row and crying out loud, and then sounding like a speech. After a while, little sounds, like shots, and then a little of quiet. Suddenly, it sounds like a piercing, otherworldly scream, like someone suffering terribly, shredding the air. The curious thing is that the story of every one of those who report having seen these incidents is exactly the same, with no deviation from the others.